On May 21, 2024, a 40-year-old British climber and his guide vanished in Everest's infamous death zone right after reaching the mountain's daunting 8,849-meter summit. What followed was a chilling story of an avoidable disaster, leading to the tragic end of two seasoned climbers who, under different circumstances, would have safely completed their expedition. This incident once again drew grim media attention to the chaotic state of the Everest climbing industry and the mismanagement that plagues the world's highest peak. Love thrilling mountain stories? Hit that subscribe button and join us for more spine-chilling adventures. You'd think after 2023, the deadliest year in Everest recorded history, action would have been taken to prevent further catastrophe. In 2023, Nepal issued a shocking 478 permits to foreign climbers, with over 700 more granted to Sherpas and support staff. The sheer number of people attempting the summit was overwhelming. Even though brutal weather forced many to retreat early, 17 lives were still lost during summit attempts that year. The Nepalese government pointed fingers at climate change for the high death toll, but seasoned climbers blamed the rapid commercialization of Everest, turning it from a mountaineer's dream into a dangerous tourist trap. The days of Everest being an adventure of camaraderie and shared struggle are long gone. Now it's a ticking box on a bucket list, a status symbol for those who can afford the staggering $100,000 to $120,000 price tag to stand at the top of the world. This influx of climbers, many inexperienced, has choked the mountain with overcrowded paths and deadly queues near the summit. Experts are terrified that, paired with climate change, this is slowly eating away at the very essence of Everest. Expedition companies, eager to cash in, sell the climb as an easy task, misleading rookies into believing that having a Sherpa who's summited a few times guarantees success. This dangerous misconception not only risks their lives, but also puts the lives of their Sherpas in peril. But that's just one part of the horror. Everest is now buried under over 30 tons of trash, oxygen bottles, tattered tents, and broken gear scattered across its frozen slopes. This blatant disrespect for the mountain has enraged many, urging the government to crack down and enforce rules requiring climbers to bring back everything they carried up. A massive cleanup on Everest removed over 4 tons of garbage, but it barely made a difference. Other cleanup missions were launched, but they only uncovered more trash buried deep beneath the snow. The local Nepalese people believe the deaths, sudden weather changes, and other strange events are signs that the mountain gods are angry. Angry because Everest has been disrespected for too long. The Nepalese government has been asked to control the number of climbers by making them prove they have experience. But Everest is a big source of income for Nepal, earning them $4 to $6 million just from climbing permits. The big question is, will the government make tough decisions to protect the mountain, even if it means losing money? While this is still being debated, one thing is clear: there are too many people on the mountain. If nothing changes, more deadly accidents will happen, just like this one. This isn't just about people daring to climb Everest. It's about how the commercialization of the mountain led to another tragic accident. In May 2024, 40-year-old Daniel Patterson and his 23-year-old guide vanished just minutes after reaching the summit. Daniel, known as Dan, was from Wakefield, England, where he co-owned a gym. He had been a fitness coach and personal trainer for years and was in great shape. No one doubted his ability to handle the climb. Dan wasn't climbing Everest for fame. He wanted to raise money for the family of a gym member who had died from cancer. In April 2024, Dan flew to Nepal and signed up with 8K Expeditions, a well-known company that had helped many climbers reach Everest summit. Dan was paired with Penji Sherpa, a 23-year-old guide who had already summited Everest twice. This was supposed to be his third trip to the top. Penji grew up near Everest and had worked as a carrier, hauling supplies through the lower camps. By 23, he had already summited Everest twice and was considered highly experienced. Together, Dan and Penji started the 124-mile trek to base camp with a team of 15 climbers. Due to the growing number of inexperienced climbers, expedition companies now run intense training sessions. They teach climbers how to put on gear, adjust oxygen tanks, and even how to wear their ice boots properly. The team also practiced acclimatization, moving between camps to help their bodies adjust to the altitude. They made their way through the dangerous Khumbu icefall to Camp 1 at 6,100 meters, then on to Camps 2 and 3 before returning to base camp. Some climbers even summited nearby peaks for extra practice. After weeks of hard training, Dan and his team were finally ready for their climb to the summit. They began their final ascent to Camp 4, the last stop before reaching the summit. The air was thin, and many climbers had to use their oxygen tanks just to breathe. The higher they went, the colder and more dangerous it became. The wind howled like a monster, and the freezing air bit into their skin. Climbing companies always wait for a small window of good weather to make the summit push. In 2024, they got about 5 days of clear skies. On Sunday, May 19th, Dan's team reached Camp 4 at 7,900 meters, 26,000 feet. This was just before the death zone, where oxygen is so low that the body starts to shut down. Camp 4 was already crowded with other climbers, all eager to make their final climb the next day. Colorful tents filled the camp, but the mood was tense. Many climbers were sick, suffering from headaches and nausea. Dan and his guide, Penji Sherpa, set up their tent and tried to rest. They knew the final push was coming. Climbers usually start their ascent at 1 to 3 a.m. to reach the summit by mid-morning. This gives them enough time to descend before the weather turns deadly. The rule is simple. If you haven't reached the summit by 2 p.m., you must turn around. Trying to come down in the dark is incredibly dangerous. One wrong step, and you could fall into a deep crevasse, never to be seen again. The next morning, Dan and Penji woke up around 1 a.m., checked their gear, and began their journey into the death zone. Ahead of them, a line of climbers lit the path with their headlamps, like a trail of ghosts in the night. As they climbed higher, every step became slower. They could only breathe through their oxygen tanks. In the death zone, very few survive without oxygen, and many who try never come back. Even those who make it to the top don't stay long. The summit is a dangerous place, where the weather can turn deadly fast, and running out of oxygen is a constant fear. Dan and Penji pushed on until they reached the balcony, a small ledge where climbers rest and swap out their oxygen tanks. After a quick break, they continued towards the most infamous part of the climb, Hillary Step. Ahead of them was a long line of climbers, moving slowly like zombies in a traffic jam. Hundreds of people were crammed together, backpacks pressing into the faces of those behind them. Dan and Penji were stuck in the crowd, taking tiny steps forward. Every now and then, they would unclip from the safety ropes to try and get ahead, but it was a dangerous gamble. Finally, they reached the Hillary Step, a 12-meter rock wall that blocks the way to the summit. Normally, it's a nightmare to climb, but during the season, it's covered with ice and snow, making it a bit easier. But still, one wrong move could send a climber falling thousands of feet to their death. Dan and Penji carefully made their way up, knowing that one slip could be the end. The mountain was not kind that day. Climbers were slowly making their way across the narrow ridge to reach the summit. The Hillary Step, a dangerous part of the climb, was where the worst traffic jams happened. At around 4:40 a.m., Dan and Penji Sherpa finally made it to the top of the world. They were thrilled to have reached the summit. They took photos, congratulated each other, and grabbed a few minutes of rest before starting the terrifying journey back down. But reaching the top is only half the battle. Now they had to make it down before they ran out of energy and strength. The line of climbers was still there, packed together like a one-way street. Some were pushing up to the summit, while others, like Dan and Penji, were trying to make their way back down. The path was far too narrow for so many people. As Dan and Penji carefully made their way down, disaster struck. Without warning, the ice ledge they were standing on collapsed, dragging 4 climbers down the eastern side of the mountain. It happened in a flash. Those who lost their footing dangled from their ropes, the only thing stopping them from falling into the abyss. Some climbers scrambled to pull them back up, but only 2 were saved. Dan and Penji had fallen farther down the deadly eastern face of the mountain into a desolate area where no one had climbed since 2019. Rescue efforts were launched, but Dan and Penji had fallen into a remote, dangerous part of the mountain. The climbing season was ending, and the weather was becoming too deadly for anyone to risk another ascent. Sending a rescue team up was considered a suicide mission. Despite her fear, Dan's partner Rebecca started a GoFundMe to raise money for the search. She was told it would cost $200,000 to fund the rescue mission, which included helicopters, aerial support, and specialized search teams. But even with all these efforts, Dan and Penji were never found. The search was called off, and the two climbers were declared missing, presumed dead, forever lost somewhere on the mountain. What makes their story even more heartbreaking is that Dan and Penji were not reckless climbers. They were prepared, experienced, and had successfully made it to the summit. It wasn't their inexperience that doomed them. It was the overcrowded mountain and a cruel twist of fate. Many have blamed the Nepalese government for letting too many climbers on Everest without stricter regulations. Videos have surfaced showing terrifyingly long lines of climbers on the narrow ridge, yet the government has refused to do anything about it. The tragic deaths of Dan and Penji have led some to say that the mountain itself could no longer bear the weight of so many people on its back. Theirs is a tragedy that should never have happened, a haunting reminder of the dangers of Everest. Enjoy scary mountain stories? Subscribe now and stay with us for more.